All right, well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Edinburgh University Black History Month program that is being sponsored by the Frederick Douglass Initiative. I'm Dr. Adrienne Dixon, and I'm a co-chair of the Frederick Douglass Initiative at Edinburgh. And my co-chair, my partner in crime, Dr. Kevon Bruce. I'll let you introduce yourself, Dr. Bruce.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dr. Kevon Bruce, and I teach in the counseling program as well. And I am the co-chair of the FDI at Edinburgh University. My research agenda is focused around post-traumatic growth in people living HIV/AIDS. I also do retention, inclusion, safety, engagement work for Black students, and anything in between that. And I'm excited for this conversation, and I look forward to hearing from you guys.
Thank you, Dr. Bruce. Well, let me just share a little bit about the FDI and what that is. It's the Frederick Douglass Initiative, and we are part of a larger collaborative across the PASHE system. This year, you know, it's such an unprecedented time. We wanted to partner with the Diversity Commission at Edinburgh University and offer a series of conversations and dialogues that would be reflective of some of the things and some of the challenges that we have experienced nationally as well as locally. And so a number of programming has been sponsored by the FDI in collaboration with the Black History Month Committee through the Diversity Commission. Next week, we'll be having a conversation around I Fear for My Life and They That Mourn. And those are a collection of works and research that faculty members across the PASHE system are working on and really speaking to some law enforcement, policing, and social justice issues that impact communities of color, particularly Black and Brown communities. Dr. Rhonda Matthews is the principal investigator here at Edinburgh University, and she'll be joined by her research assistants. And then I'll also be a part of that conversation and joined by one of our students who's working with me, Harrison Dixon, who will be talking about the Constitution and facilitating his role in facilitating critical conversations locally around this and across the system. The following week, we'll have a group of faculty members who will talk about integrating Black History Month and multiculturalism and diversity initiatives in curriculum, and why it's so important that we not see this as, standalone courses or standalone opportunities, but that they're weaving and woven through all of the initiatives, and we create really high impactful opportunities for students and in our communities. And then lastly, we're going to have a critical conversation about healthcare and how it impacts Black America. And so a number of physicians will be joining us in a conversation, and particularly as we're discussing COVID and the impact of the COVID slide on communities of color and underrepresented communities, that we'll be talking about that. So some really nice conversations that are going on. Tonight's conversation is a very important conversation. Our goal tonight is to talk about the LGBTQ community, and especially Black trans, and the impact on the social justice movement, and the impact on African American history that sometimes, because of some of the challenges and historical taboos, we have not talked about. So we'll be talking about that today. We're joined, Dr. Bruce and myself, by some very esteemed panelists. First, I'll go to my left at the top of the screen, which is Mr. Dalen Hooks. Dalen is the director of the Central Outreach program here in Erie, and we're excited that he's joining with us. If you followed him on Facebook or his social media, you know that he is an activist and has really been working to promote this initiative and to bring awareness to this. Welcome, Dalen. I'll let you introduce or share a little bit about yourself.
Thank you. I just recently moved back to Erie to bring Central Outreach Wellness Center, an LGBTQ focused medical clinic to the community. I do a lot of activism work alongside of TransYOUniting. And I'm just really happy to be here.
Thank you. We're also joined by a very esteemed colleague, Dr. Will Koehler, who's joining us. He's a faculty member in the social work department at Edinburgh University, and he is a respected clinician in our community who specializes with his work in terms of the LGBTQ community. Dr. Will, you want to share more?
Sure, thank you. I am excited to be here, both wearing my social work department hat. This year, I get to serve the department as department chair. And my research there really focuses in on LGBTQ violence and bullying on campuses and in communities. And my clinical work serves HIV positive population, LGBTQ population, and in a particular focus of trauma-informed care, and then trauma-focused care to help people that of different intersectionalities deal with their past trauma and learn and grow from that. So I'm also excited to share. I'm so happy that Central Outreach Wellness Center is up in Erie. It's something that we've needed for a long time. So, and they've generously allowed us to move in next door to them. So we're going to be opening a site. My practice is called Journey to a Trauma-Informed Life. And hopefully within the next 2 weeks, we'll be moving in, and it won't be just rooms full of furniture wrapped in plastic. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you for being with us today. And we're joined by Ms. Dena Stanley, who is the founder and director of TransYOUniting in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Dena, you want to talk a little bit about the work that you do in Pittsburgh?
Sure. So again, I'm Dena Stanley. I'm a Black trans woman here in Pittsburgh. I do everything trans here, from housing and healthcare to job placement, case management, everything, you name it, we do it for trans folks here in the city.
Well, welcome. We're excited that you're willing to share with us. I mean, all of your respective experiences and talents really speak to what we wanted to focus on in our FDI initiative, which was really talking about research and activism and teaching. And Dr. Will, you started talking a little bit about your practice and some of the things that you worked on in your research regarding trauma. So I'll throw it out to the group just in general to talk about to address in general your thoughts around trauma and what has been the impact to the LGBTQ community as a whole, and why activism is so important when you think about trauma and what we know about it. Why is activism important?
For me, I'll start for the trans community. Activism is very important because it's getting a message out there. It's getting, we're being heard, we're being seen. I think that right now we're dealing with folks who are scared or not really understand about the changes that are happening with gender, because gender is so expansive right now. And, that's why there's so much fight back. And it's while we're in these streets and we're fighting, for the rights, we're also educating other folks in the process. So it's imperative that we're out there, so that message could be heard on a louder speaker. But that's about what I got. Dalen?
If I could just add on to that, I think that a lot of people fear what they don't understand. And there's a lot of miseducation out there. So my biggest part of activism is showing support and showing trans and non-binary folk that we're showing up for them and that we're presenting ourselves for them. I think that a lot of folks feel unsupported, and that also adds to their trauma. So this activism that we've been doing in the streets is also a support in building kind of a second family. I've met so many folks while I've been out, and I've been able to connect folks to folks while I've been out. And that has been, we've kind of created a community of activists who are like second line support for a lot of the people that we meet. And a lot of the folks that we have met, we've been able to link through services, through our activism work. So that's something that I'm extremely proud of.
Thank you. Dr. Wu, in what ways do you see when, you know, both Dena and Dalen are talking about the support systems and building those resources from your private practice? Have you experienced working with individuals that this has been traumatic for them? And, you know, what are some of the things that we need to know, or what are areas of awareness that we need to be promoting when we have opportunities or platforms around the implications?
Yeah, thank you. I think as an ally, I am always looking for ways to empower folks and telling their own narrative from an empowered perspective after they've had opportunity to heal and reconnect with a community that they felt like they were perhaps ostracized from before or outcast. And so I think that empowerment is a big part of what we do and what we see is needed, not just to do that individual healing and reprocessing what you've been through from a trauma-informed perspective, but also to connect you, empower you to find your own voice and to share that story of growth and survival, and then reconnect with a family of choice. So
thank you. Dr. Bruce, you've done a lot of work in schools. That's one of your backgrounds professionally, is as a school counselor. You know, have you encountered where young people, in terms of their embracing or development or trying to reconcile their sense of identity, have experienced, you know, had those traumatic events? I mean, Dr. Koehler was talking about working with folks around bullying and what that experience has been. What's been your experience with young people in schools, and how prepared do you feel schools are to support young people as they evolve around these fluid identities and some of the challenges that go with that?
I think it depends on location. That's the first thing. And if that state and the laws are, you know, encompassing of those people who identify LGBTQIA+, then they have a better chance of having support in the school system. But if you're in a state where people aren't exposed to anyone who's anywhere on the spectrum, then I think they're unsure of how to proceed forward, how to support you best. And also their own assumption, worldviews, and biases come into their work, which it shouldn't as an educator. But I've seen, for the most part, I've seen positive outcomes for support. I've seen students who were questioning, students who came out to parents, and, you know, us as the stakeholders, we were there to support them in their process, whatever that was for them. And if I had to put a number on it, it's 80% of it has been successful.
Thank you. You also raise, you know, another dynamic, which is around practice, laws, policy. You know, where do you all, or the group, feels that there are gaps in terms of issues around policy and practice, and where can we support initiatives, or where do we need to focus our support to be allies, and particularly around policy and practice?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, bringing me back to when I was in the school setting, one of the last schools I was in, it was a middle school, and we had a student who was beginning to identify changing their pronouns, and they wanted access to a gender neutral bathroom. And at the time, the school wasn't in support of that. So the counseling department, we end up rallying and making a fuss, and we then let that child use the staff bathroom. But I think what the school board said was that the legislation wasn't there, that they didn't need to support this student. And that's my thing to drop into then, you know, if anyone has any more information on what's happened since then, because this was a few years ago, jump in.
So I'm just going to piggyback off of that a little bit. So what we do need is bills put in place to protect trans folks and LGBT folks. So a lot of lobbying, a lot of legislation, a lot of people getting involved that way. Like for instance, here in Pennsylvania, like what you just said, we need a non-discrimination bill put in place for situations like that, because then that wouldn't happen at all whatsoever. In certain counties, like here in Allegheny County, in a borough that I stay in, Philadelphia, they have ordinances put in place, but that's not good enough. We need a federal level bill put in place for non-discrimination, for folks to know that it is not okay and that, you know, we are going to be protected by the government. I think that folks know that there's no protection and they feel like it's okay. Again, like what I was saying before, there's just this constant battle with gender fluency right now, because folks don't want to really educate themselves a lot of times, or they're scared to educate themselves. So there's a lot of battle back and forth, and with that comes a lot of trauma and a lot of violence that happens a lot within the community.
I also like to say that I was contacted in the past to have conversations with Pittsburgh Public Schools in Glisson around bathrooms and signage for bathrooms, like what's popular, what's proper, what's offensive, and different things like that. I think that there's a lot of schools and school districts who don't have policies and procedures around gender, around pronouns, and around discrimination. And I think that people try to shy away from these conversations because they're uncomfortable to have. But I think that as things are changing and evolving, I think that these are the type of things that need to be brought up in conversation at school board meetings, so that we can get ahead of it before we get behind it. I can't stress enough that there's so many young trans and non-binary kids coming out in schools, and they need a support system, and they need to be able to feel comfortable being who they are. I've witnessed bullying against young trans kids, and I think it's because people are not being educated at the right ages around these things. And I try to have as many conversations as I can about this, so that people can prepare themselves and people can put policies in place to protect these kids.
You know, it's a good point. I'm sorry, Dena. And after you, probably some further comments on this conversation, Dr. Bruce was trying to jump in there, but you raise a good point. And I just want to point this out because I had a personal experience with an organization, an entity that I'm connected with. And we really ended up talking about the bathroom situation for a long time. And it was not that people were necessarily opposed to it, but I do think people did not have information and were intimidated because of the lack of knowledge or understanding. And it was a struggle for me because, you know, having gone to professional conferences in large, you know, cities or communities, just ACA, APA, whatever, it really, in my mind, was, oh, it's no big deal. Like I go to, you know, gender neutral bathrooms all the time. Like when I'm at conferences, because right, what's the bathrooms that's always backed up? It is, you know, the woman's bathroom. And so for me, like when I was going to the bathroom, I didn't care where I went, you know, as long as you'll come into my space, I was okay with that. But it really was very eye-opening about what was behind the concerns, that it wasn't just, you know, people coming into a gender neutral bathroom. And so the amount of time that we had to spend in terms of really being able to, I think, let people express their concerns and talk about it, but it presented an opportunity for education. So I would agree. I think, you know, the more we can bring awareness and where I was like, I don't get why we spending so much time. And then it hit me why we needed to spend the time for people to understand and to, appreciate what it might be for someone else who is not in those rigid, categorical kind of gender identities, and what that experience might be like if I don't have a place to go where I feel safe. Like, others are playing around with that safety dynamic, but I don't feel safe. And what does this mean for me? So yeah, I think, that's so important that we figure out ways to advocate and lobby for additional opportunities of awareness and education. And I do think when you start talking about young people, people start to get very concerned about what messages and what narratives were given to young people, right? So those values start to kick in. I'm sorry, Dena, you were gonna jump in here.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. I was just going to say, also supporting folks like myself. Well, I'm not going into politics, but like just trans folks that, or LGBT folks that want to get into politics, putting us in those positions because we are the ones who have this experience or live this life, so, putting folks in position, supporting them in that role, to make these changes. Because a lot of times there's nobody in that position that can really understand what we're going through. So how are they going to be able to make that change? People can tell you things, but they're really not lived in this experience. So it's a little bit harder. And about this bathroom situation, that kind of started around the time that they did marriage equality. So once when you get, that 12 steps forward, sometimes you get 10 steps back. So they start attacking the trans folks about the bathroom issue. People go to the restroom just to use the restroom. That is it. And it is so sad that all of this extra stuff came up out of that. But that's what happens when you start pushing and persevering and things start changing. People don't like change. But I'm sorry.
I just wanted to jump in and say, I think another area that really needs some policy and practice improvement is in the area of the curriculum that we're teaching. And, at best, we have young people coming up in queer bodies and not knowing and not feeling comfortable and maybe being singled out because the curriculum and the teacher teaching in the 10th grade health class is like, and then all bodies are different and all, and then they point out the one trans person or gender expansive person or the one person that has already this dysphoria or something. So that's the best case scenario that I've heard in our schools about teaching about sex and health and different bodies and worse is, it can just go far worse. So I think that, yes. And also the curriculum, just about how it should be that you have to wait till 10th grade to learn about different bodies when that should be from kindergarten on up through, that bodies are different. And that's another area that I think needs a lot of improving is curriculum and how that's put forward to some very conservative school districts and places in our communities and in our state and country. Again, not to get into politics, as Dena said, but
Can we actually jump into politics for 1 second? Because we're talking a lot about the youth, which is very important. But I wanted to speak about, I know Biden had signed an executive order when he got into office that was tailored to the trans community. Is anyone familiar with that executive order? And is it actually doing the work that it set out to do? Because I'm not 100% familiar with it. What I know about it is that he signed an order, and I think it was for non-discrimination in the military. Did it have other things under there? Can somebody?
Yes, sure. So it was a ban for trans folks to be in the military. So if you were an active member, you were not allowed to, you were stripped and just different situations, different things like that. Once Trump got into office, when Obama was in office, that's when, they put that into law that trans folks could be in the Army. So the executive order basically just granted trans folks back all of their privileges and rights within the service. And yeah, that's basically that but really when they do the executive orders, to me, it looks nice and everything, but it's about the groundwork that you're doing in your counties, in your city. So a lot of times folks need to, it's cool to do the Fed thing, but really focus on what's happening locally, because those are the positions and people that are really making the changes that affect us right now.
Thank you for shining light to that. So you said earlier.
Can I jump in? I'm sorry, real quick, because it's so interesting you brought that up. I was thinking about, what do you all think of the legislators who have been elected and, that have this representation of identity across the LGBTQ community? And then what do you all think about our former health secretary, who in her elevation to the national team, and what's the impact do you think that will have in general on advocacy around social justice issues for this population, this community?
I would definitely say that for like the LGBT folks getting into office is amazing. That goes back to what I was saying earlier. Us being in there, we're able to make those changes and have those conversations. And this is my life. I've lived this. So when I'm talking about this, is not nothing that I've seen in the streets or heard about. This is my life. So that's amazing that we have folks in there that can really fight for us. They've been in those positions and basically in the struggle with us. And as far as Dr. Levine, oh my God, that's amazing. Now we have a person that's in a high position that can really fight for, housing and healthcare the way that it needs to be for trans folks. That is a really major, major barrier for trans folks. And with that, sky's the limit, but right now it is a major barrier for us. We're at the bottom of the bottom of the bottom when it comes to anything, any services or anything. We're like extremely marginalized as trans people. So with Dr. Levine being in that position that she's in, she can really start making changes as far as healthcare and as far as housing, in my opinion. And it just looks, it gives people like myself a beacon of hope that, if she can be in these positions, then the world is really changing for the good.
I just want to add that it's really hard to be discriminatory. And when you have someone like Dr. Levine right in your face doing the work, you know what I mean? It's kind of hard not to support this community when you have someone that you have to work with in order to get things done. And I think that it's going to open a lot of people's eyes to the community and how like well-versed our community is. And hopefully with her being in that position, more people will get educated and more hearts and minds will be changed by the work that she's able to do in this new position.
I wanted to share some experiences that I've worked with some of the clients that we've seen in the practice regarding when people are elevated into positions where they can be more visible. Sometimes that causes a lot of fear, particularly on youth. I'm working with a trans young man from Waterford area. And when there was some transphobic and hate speech directed towards Dr. Levine posted on a billboard, and this young man was, fearful for his life. And so I think that there's that hope that as they're elevated, they will, raise the level of awareness across the board. I think it also means that as allies and as support people and as people that wrap around more vulnerable people, we need to be aware that we need to be reaching out and helping and supporting them, because they feel sometimes more vulnerable and highlighted in non-supportive communities from the backlash. And so I agree that I think it's wonderful that Tyler Titus is president of the Erie City School Board. I think it's wonderful, Dr. Levine. All of these roles are needing to be filled very importantly, but I think it also means some of the more vulnerable people are scared by that because it draws attention to them, they feel.
Yeah, I was just going to say that's a great point, Dr. Koehler, that the attention and that it brings, that can be very intimidating. And there's some reality that people then project, and they the confabulation that goes along with that it's somehow everything becomes the individual's agenda around that. And as a person of color, I can relate to that, because I do think that when there's issues around people of color, African Americans, African American women, it was like, okay, because I have some representation of that or present in that way, it gets confounded that that's my agenda all the time, and that's that's all I think about, and people then project those things back onto me that they may be experiencing in other settings. So it's a great point that there may be folks who may not be as protected or may be somewhat more fragile. And again, that can be a role that we can support them and recognize too, not to put more pressure there, because sometimes we do that and not necessarily think about how we might assign pressure to them and expectations.
Yeah, to talk about pressure, expectations, backlash, and then talk about people of color all in one. I think if you guys are familiar with Zaya Wade, I wanted to bring her up, and I had a question for the panel, because I don't know, and if it happened, then let me know. I know that she changed her name and her pronouns, but I don't know if they ever release any information on whether she is actually transitioning. And I wanted to, and even without that information, the Black community was in an uproar, like, she's too young, these parents are forcing it on her, Gabrielle Union is forcing it on her, and like all of these things. And it's funny because as a Black family, they were supporting her in whatever she decided, but the community outside that doesn't pay the bills had an issue with her being so young. And I know the LGBTQIA community has said a long time ago that someone can be born the way they are. So even with transitioning, do you feel that there is an age that's too young to transition? And then also the first question, is they actually transitioning, or is she just, did she just change her pronouns?
So
Go ahead.
Okay. As far as too young, no, I don't think that you're too young, too old. You know who you are. And when it comes to like transitioning, gender is fluid. So it's not about any type of transition at all whatsoever. It's who you are, kind of like there is not like, okay, she's transitioning to a woman, or she's transitioning into, or X, Y, and Z, whatever. It's just, that's their pronouns, that's how they're going, and that's just what it is. It's really just, gender is really fluent. So there is, I don't know how to frame it or word it, but gender is fluent, and it really doesn't matter. It's not really a transitional type of situation. It's just gender is fluent, and that is her pronouns and who she is.
I just want to add that when people come out as trans, regardless of what age, that does not mean that they are immediately going to start taking hormone replacement therapy.
Mm-hmm.
It's acknowledging that I'm a woman, I've always felt like a woman, or I'm a man and I've always felt like a man. That is
or I'm just a person.
how I'm going to present myself from this day forward. I think that by changing your pronouns and changing your name, you're acknowledging who you are. And this is how I'm going to start presenting myself. If I was going to transition to female and I'm going to change my name and I'm going to change my pronouns, I'm doing that to open up everyone's eyes to who I am. I may start dressing more feminine, but I may not change my clothes right away. I may start, the process, but that does not mean that I'm going to start the hormone replacement therapy. I see a lot of adolescent youth who is trans, change their name, change their pronouns, change the way that they present themselves, and little by little, they begin their transition. And transitioning is not just a medical thing. It's not just hormone replacement therapy. It's a mental thing. Um, it there's so many layers to transitioning. There's so many layers to being transgender and coming out as transgender. A lot of folks will start the blockers, but not start the hormones when transitioning to female at a young age. There's a guideline for HRT for youth that folks should follow. I have not seen in any publications Zaya Wade or her family come out about like if she's taken hormone replacement therapy or if she started transitioning around with medicine. But I think that personally, I wouldn't put that out there so soon either because she's so young. Um, but I just wanted to note that when someone says they're transitioning, they're starting here first. It's a renewal of who they are. They're coming out as who they are, and the first step is the pronouns. It is the name. It is the way that they present themselves. It is the way that they affirm their clothing, and everything else is just a process.
Mhm.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with Jodie Patterson, and she has a son who I thought it was interesting, who's like the opposite of what we see as mainstream transitioning. Her son name is Penelope. That was the birth given name. She was born female and then decided to come out to her mom and then say, I am a male. And then they were trying to pick a name for the child. And the child said, well, my name is Penelope. Even though he is now male, trans male, he still is going to keep the name that his mom gave him. And I thought that was very interesting. And they have a book about it, The True Story of Penelope, a boy named Penelope, if you guys want to read that.
Thank you.
I think it's so interesting that, when we're talking about this, it just resonates with developmental, development identity models. And so, when you think back to those like around race and around other dynamics is about like people just discovering who they are, as a clinician, as a, educator, definitely, I certainly can appreciate these dynamics that it's just evolving and it's just an individual discovering who they are, whatever that looks like, And I do think there are times that sometimes we ask questions and we're not understanding the implications of that and what the impact may be or long-term impact. I remember my niece very, long ago, it was something she did. She was a little girl, and I was actually being smart. I was like, "Who do you think you are? Like, stop it." And she was like, "Who do you think I am?" And it just actually spurred this conversation with this then 5-year-old around her sense of who she thought who she was. She took it literal, where I was like, get yourself together, little girl. She took it very literal that I was asking her about who she was. And it was just fascinating to me as I had this conversation with her about who she saw herself as and how she described it. And it was more around race and other things, but that, it was more fluid. It wasn't in terms of what I thought she might have said, who she was and how she was seeing the world and really how she thought the world saw her and was responding to her was actually shaping her sense of confidence about expressing those things. And I say all of that to say that as a parent, it does get a little dicey. Like people do, even though you want people to be healthy and, to those families who had the courage. I love that series, I Am Jazz, to help their young people, evolve. And if you watched early on the I Am Jazz, like the parents weren't necessarily on board with this. It wasn't that they were like, okay, we're gung ho, we're gonna do this and support it. I heard this mom give an interview, and it has just sat with me. What the mother ended up saying was, I struggle with this. I knew as a family we were going to struggle with this. But if it meant that I was going to lose my child, I would much rather gain a daughter than lose my son forever. And so what she was saying was she was reading up on the research about young people who struggle with this when they don't have support systems and the numbers of suicides. And she was not going to allow that to happen to her child. And so she was willing to do whatever to support and to understand where her child was and figure it out. And so, but I think as parents, you know, that can be difficult. And so we go back to education. How do we provide education and help people understand what may be happening developmentally? And if you're too rigid, that the child may choose to retreat and not express feelings and struggles, and it can lead to some adverse kinds of responses because they feel alone, or they feel abandoned, or they feel shameful and guilty about what they're experiencing and what's going on in their life. So what do we do now? We've talked about this need for education, and we talked about policy and practice. What do we need to do to put it in place? How do we make this happen? Because it's not just enough that people are at the table. To me, it's kind of like the Biden thing. Everybody was like, get Biden in there. The world is going to be different. It's like, okay, now Biden, what you doing? What you going to do? How do we make it happen? Because I think having people at the table is great who have identity and who have lived experience, but it's also a little unfair that all of that we put on their shoulders and sit back and expect them to turn it. What do we need to do to continue to push this forward as allies, as activists, and to ensure that the movement continues literally moving forward?
Continue having conversations with folks in uncomfortable situations, you know, with family members when it brings it up. If you see it on TV, just continue to normalize it, that trans folks are not a threat. You know, the LGBT folks are not a threat at all whatsoever, just normalizing that. I would definitely say, and just elevating folks, but educating yourself as well. And like when you meet a trans folk, a person, you know, I always tell people, you know, maybe start with your pronouns or something that's kind of inviting and letting folks know that it's okay. You know, when you start to use your pronouns, it's really important. Like, hey, my name is Dena, my pronouns are she, hers, and begin a conversation. Because people sometimes they'll let their guard down and really have a conversation with you. And if you slip up, you know, and you apologize and move forward from that, you know, it won't be a big ordeal. But just be kind to other people, educate yourself, have conversations, and continue doing like panels and, you know, what we're doing right now. This is what we can do, you know, because it's unfair in the world right now. People are unkind and, you know, they're uneducated as well. So we have to educate folks in order for the change to happen.
I agree with you. I think that conversations and education is the first step. And I also think that the burden shouldn't be on this community to constantly educate and fight for change. I think that we also have to teach people how to be allies to this community. So when you educate yourself on pronouns, or you educate yourself on what's going on in the world with this community, take that back to your job, take that back to your church, take that back to your colleagues, take those things that you've learned back to your friends and challenge them to be a part of the right side of change as well. So if you're working somewhere and you notice that there's not gender neutral bathrooms, and you've seen articles about this, I think that you need to raise that conversation with HR or whoever that you know can make a change for that. If there's not community groups, or if there's not groups for these type of conversations in your workplace, or at your school, or at your church, create them, or put the bug in someone's ear who you know can start that fire and who you know can take that and run with it. And that's what I do. I challenge the mold everywhere I go. I challenge the structure everywhere I go. Even at my niece and nephew's school, when I hear about certain things, I put my 2 cents on it. I'll send a few emails. When I'm at the hospital, if I see that there's no gender neutral bathrooms, or if I come across someone who I've seen some misgender someone, I'll stop, I'll have a conversation, and I will send an email the next day, because I take passion in that, and I think that it's important to make people feel comfortable everywhere that they go. And I think that everyone has a right to feel comfortable walking in who they are. So I think that if everyone can adapt that mindset, these won't be uncomfortable conversations in the near future.
I also wanted to say, like the late great John Lewis always say, if you see something, say something. So if you see a situation, say something. Let's make that change.
Well said, everyone. Well said. I mean, I think that, again, there are times that people ask questions because they're trying to wrap their head around it. And years and years ago, I remember having a conversation with a family member, and it was like, oh, you know, it wasn't judgment. It was a judgment at all, but I was just trying to like understand so that I could be supportive. And from my perspective, I was asking a question, and my family member immediately said, maybe it's not for you to understand, but it's just for you to be present.
Period.
And it helped me. It helped me. I don't have to make sense of it. I don't have to understand it, but can I accept and be responsive? That's all. Be present. And so I think I love your comments, everyone. That's so exciting to hear that. I think, again, we look for ways to be advocates, to be resources to the community. And certainly, you know, when as an Edinburgh faculty member, this is one of the reasons why this was so important, is because much of what we do as faculty members is that we're researching, right? We're researching areas, we're trying to bring awareness, we're trying to bring information about specific responses or interventions. And so it's very important to us, you know, Dr. Koehler and Dr. Bruce, who are here, these are areas that they research in. It also is about teaching, educating, and certainly advocacy. How are we supporting these initiatives and moving it forward? You know, so I appreciate all of you here. I certainly appreciate our participants who are on the call this evening. And now, you know, we'll open it up if there's any last comments or feedback. I have a couple of things I want to show the group before we end formally, but certainly want to open it up for additional comments or questions.
I just wanted to say I wish we could just stay on here and talk for a couple more hours, because I do have questions, but I feel like those would take us well beyond. So this was good. Thank you very much for allowing me to be here.
Thank you, Dr. Will, for being a part of this. I actually have a question. I hope it don't take us long, but I just thought about, I forgot to ask this question. What do you all think about some of the challenges in particular the African American community and even the Latino community, that this has not always been well received? And how do we help people navigate that? Not that we're going to change some of the thoughts and values around that, but how do we help folks who are on this continuum of identity? How do we help them navigate that and feel supported? What can we do?
I just want to chime in on this because it's kind of important to me. I grew up very, very, very involved in the church. And I know that young African Americans who are trans and non-binary or may just be a part of other parts of the LGBTQ community have a hard time with finding themselves through religion. And I think that we need to be more protective of our youth. I think that when we identify folks or people come out in younger ages, we need to get them support, even if we don't know how to support them. And I think that that is a space where we could spread more education around the community and around pronouns, because oftentimes I find a lot of youth who have been cast away from home drop into my clinic, and the they're like, I can't go get help at church. And I'm like, why? They were like, that's the one place I should be able to go, and I can't go there. And the fact that I have had a lot of youth tell me that in the past year is kind of like alarming to me. And so when I go into those spaces, I really try to spread as much education and leave pamphlets and leave cards from my clinic and my business, and leave cards for TransYOUniting and other advocacy organizations that I know of, so that when those type of situations arise, people know about resources that they could share with the youth, because that's really when the trauma forms for youth, when they don't feel like they have a support system and they don't feel comfortable talking about the things that they're going through, or they don't feel comfortable sharing what's going on with them and their thoughts around gender. So I really think that faith-based communities need more conversations and need more help with how to get our LGBTQ youth support.
Well said, definitely well said. I think that a lot of the youth, they get it, but it's the adults that are the problem. The youth get it. These youth, they really, really get it. The adults are the ones that are really pushing these initiatives a lot of times, and then it starts to switch the minds of the children a lot of times. So I really feel like that we have to start educating. Well, folks have to educate themselves, do a lot of research, educate yourself, and educate people around you, adults around you, because it's us, the adults, that are really influencing these children, because the children really don't have a problem with it. But when you're at home and your parents, you see your parents looking at something on TV and they see a trans person, they say, oh, that's a man, and what is he doing with a wig on, and X, Y, and Z, and blah, blah, blah. Then you start, that's when that hatred and everything starts to really build inside of you. It's just like racism, it's the same thing. You're not born with it. You're taught it.
Great point, Dena. Years ago, I used to do a training, it was a curriculum, Unlearning Racism. And it was really about allies and bringing awareness, but really about how we start to establish those kind of, patterns and belief systems, and then reinforce them, and things that we do, and things that we don't do or say. It could be the opposite. It can be reinforced even with our silence, and why it's so important to be an ally. I just want to share, hopefully I can do this very quickly, real quick with the group before we end this evening, about folks who might share an identity that we might not have thought of, who were contributors to the African American community, but had identity somewhere on that LGBTQ continuum, and why it's so important that we are aware of this and mindful of the rich history, in particular as we're celebrating African American history, Latino history, Black and Brown communities, of what the contributions were. I just wanted to share a few, because sometimes I think that gets lost, about identity, relationships, what that look like. And I thought, it'd be great to end with some major contributors and who reflect great things in this community, this population. Again, to everyone, thank you so much. We might have to do a part 2 to this. I'm with Dr. Koehler. Like, we need to talk some more. There's some more things that we really didn't get to. An hour really does not give us the time. I especially want to thank Dana Stanley for participating. She is the founder and the director of TransYOUniting in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So thank you so much. Dalen Hooks, who is the Erie director of the Central Outreach Wellness Center. Thank you again for your participation and being with us. Dr. Will Koehler, faculty member and chair of the social work department, and also private practitioner who specializes in working with folks. His practice, tell us again, Dr. Koehler, what's the name of your private practice?
Journey to a Trauma-Informed Life.
Absolutely. Thank you again. Dr. Bruce, who is my co-chair and my partner for the FDI. Thank you all for participating and being so transparent and sharing on this evening. We encourage you to join us for the remainder of the month on Thursday evenings at 4 p.m. We'll be having these critical conversations that really just bring awareness. Certainly we cannot really address the breadth of what needs to occur on these topics, but we want to encourage you to participate with us and share, and we hope that we'll be able to come back to conversations like this evening and expand more on this so that we continue to bring awareness and we can demonstrate to the community at large of our appreciation and our willingness to talk about this, to be an ally and to bring awareness. Thank you all. We appreciate your participation and we look forward to your future engagement with us and participation with us. Have a great evening, everyone.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.